The wrench slipped from my hands and clattered against the concrete basement floor. I'd been staring at the same bolt for 3 minutes, but my mind wasn't on the repair anymore. It was on what Margaret had just said upstairs, her voice barely, above a whisper. "You're so kind, and I'm just a 48-year-old widow." The way she'd looked down at her hands when she said it, like she was apologizing for existing. I picked up the wrench and tried to focus on the washing machine. But something about this whole situation felt different than my usual service calls. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I never expected Tuesday morning to change everything I thought I knew about people. My name is Jake Sullivan, and I've been fixing appliances in Millbrook for 12 years. Same routine every day, coffee at 6 a.m., check the service requests, load the van, drive from house to house fixing whatever's broken. Washing machines, dryers, refrigerators, I've seen it all. Most days blur together, but this Tuesday started differently from the moment I pulled into the driveway on Maple Street. The house was a modest 2-story colonial, painted pale yellow with white shutters that looked like they'd seen better days. The lawn was perfectly maintained though, not a weed in sight. I grabbed my toolbox from the van and walked up to the front door, expecting another routine repair call. When Margaret Chen opened the door, I was struck by how carefully put together she looked, despite the early hour. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore a simple blue cardigan over dark jeans. But there was something in her eyes, a wariness that went beyond just letting a stranger into her home. "You must be from Peterson's Appliance Service," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "I'm Margaret. Thank you for coming so early." The inside of the house was immaculate. Family photos lined the hallway, and I caught glimpses of a man in many of them. Wedding pictures, vacation snapshots, candid moments around what looked like this very house. The photos seemed to stop abruptly around 5 years ago, and I found myself wondering about the story behind that timeline. "The washing machine is downstairs," Margaret said, leading me toward a door that opened to the basement stairs. "It's been making this awful grinding noise, and yesterday it just stopped working completely. I tried everything I could think of, but I'm not very handy with these things." The basement was finished and organized, with a small laundry area tucked into one corner. The washing machine was a mid-range model, probably 8 years old. I could see water pooled beneath it, which told me part of the story before I even opened it up. "When did you first notice the noise?" I asked, setting down my toolbox and starting my preliminary inspection. "About 2 weeks ago," Margaret replied, hovering nearby but not too close. "At first I thought it was just getting older, you know? David always said machines make noise when they're working hard." She paused, and I sensed there was more to that story. "But then it got worse, and now it won't spin at all." I nodded and began disconnecting the machine from the wall. "David was your husband?" I asked gently, not wanting to pry but sensing she needed to talk. "Yes." Her voice got quieter. "He passed away 3 years ago. Heart attack. He was only 51. She sat down on a small stool near the basement stairs. "He was the one who took care of all the repairs around here. I keep thinking I should learn these things, but every time something breaks, I just feel so helpless." I pulled the washing machine away from the wall and started examining the back panel. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said, "and don't feel bad about not knowing about repairs. That's what I'm here for. I suppose it's just that David made everything look so easy. He'd disappear down here for 20 minutes and somehow fix whatever was wrong. I used to tease him about being part machine himself." She laughed softly, but there was sadness in it. "Now I call repair services for everything. The garbage disposal last month, the ceiling fan in June, and now this." I removed the back panel and immediately saw the problem. The drive belt had snapped, and there were metal shavings around the motor housing that suggested bearing damage. This wasn't going to be a simple fix. "How long have you lived in this house?" I asked while examining the motor. 18 years, Margaret said. "We bought it right after we got married. David said it had good bones and we could make it into our dream home." She gestured around the finished basement. "He did all this work himself. The paneling, the flooring, even ran new electrical for the laundry area. He was so proud of it." I could see the quality of the work. Everything was level and properly finished. David had clearly known what he was doing. He did beautiful work, I said. This is better than most professional jobs I've seen. Thank you. That means a lot. Margaret's voice had a warmth in it that hadn't been there when I arrived. Can I ask you something? How did you get into appliance repair? I continued working while I talked, removing the motor assembly to get a better look at the damage. Actually, I started out studying engineering in college. But my dad got sick during my junior year, and I needed to come home to help with the family business. He ran a small repair shop, mostly appliances and small electronics. I figured I'd work there for a year or two, then go back to school. I paused, remembering. That was 15 years ago. Do you regret not finishing? Sometimes. But I learned something important working with my hands every day. There's satisfaction in fixing things that are broken, in taking something that's causing someone stress and making it work again. My dad used to say that a good repairman doesn't just fix machines. He fixes people's days. Margaret was quiet for a moment. That's a beautiful way to think about it. I never considered that perspective. I had the motor out now and could see the full extent of the damage. The main bearing was shot, and there was scoring on the shaft that meant this motor was beyond economical repair. I turned to face Margaret, preparing to deliver news I knew she wouldn't want to hear. I'm afraid I have some bad news about your washing machine, I said. The motor bearing has failed, and there's significant damage to the shaft. To repair this properly, we'd need to replace the entire motor assembly. And on a machine this age, that would cost almost as much as buying a new one. Margaret's face fell. Oh, I see. She was quiet for a long moment, looking at the disabled machine. How much would a new one cost? A decent replacement would run you anywhere from $600 to $1,000, depending on features. Installation would be extra. She nodded slowly, but I could see her calculating in her head. That's a significant expense right now. I'm between jobs at the moment, and money is a bit tight. Something in her tone made me look at her more carefully. There was pride there, someone who wasn't used to admitting financial difficulty. What kind of work do you do? I was a marketing coordinator for a consulting firm downtown. Was there for 8 years, but they downsized last month. I'm looking for something new. But at 48, it's harder than I expected. She managed a small smile. Apparently my skills are a bit outdated for the digital marketing world. I found myself thinking about my own mother, who'd struggled to find work. After my father died, the job market could be brutal for people over 40, especially women. I might have an idea, I said. Let me take another look at this motor. I spent the next 20 minutes disassembling the motor completely, examining each component. The bearing was definitely shot, but the shaft damage wasn't as bad as I'd initially thought. With some careful work, this might be salvageable after all. Margaret, can I ask you a favor? Do you have any coffee? This is going to take me a while, and I could use some caffeine. Of course. I should have offered earlier. How do you take it? Black is fine, thanks. While she went upstairs, I called my parts supplier. Danny Rodriguez had been selling me parts for 10 years, and he owed me a few favors. More importantly, he had a soft spot for people going through hard times. Danny, it's Jake Sullivan. I need a favor. I'm looking at a washing machine motor that needs a new bearing, but the customer can't afford a full replacement. You have any refurbished bearings that might work? What's the model number? I rattled off the specifications from the motor housing. Yeah, I've got something that'll work. Pulled it from a machine that had electrical damage, but the motor was fine. I can let you have it for cost, about $40. You're a lifesaver, Danny. I'll pick it up this afternoon. Margaret returned with a steaming mug just as I hung up. Good news, I said. I think I can fix this after all. It'll take some creative work, but I found a part that should do the job. Her face lit up in a way that transformed her completely. Really? Are you sure? Pretty sure. It won't be as good as new, but it should give you several more years of service. The total cost would be about $150, the part, some additional hardware, and labor. That would be amazing. I can't tell you how much that means to me. She sat back down on the stool, cradling her coffee mug. You know, when I called your company, I expected someone to come in, tell me I needed a new machine, and leave. I never expected... She trailed off. Expected what? I don't know. Kindness, I guess. Someone who would actually listen and try to help rather than just sell me the most expensive solution. She was quiet for a moment. It's been a long time since someone went out of their way for me like this. Something in her voice made me pause my work. There was a loneliness there that went beyond just being widowed. You mentioned you were between jobs. Have you been looking for a long? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 3 months now. I've had a few interviews, but nothing's panned out. The feedback is always the same. They want someone with more current digital experience, or they go with a younger candidate who'll work for less money. She sighed. David always said I was too proud to ask for help, but I'm starting to think pride is a luxury I can't afford anymore. What kind of marketing did you do at your old job? Traditional marketing, mostly. Print campaigns, event coordination, some radio advertising. I managed client relationships and coordinated with vendors. But now everything is online. Social, media campaigns, search engine optimization, analytics, I don't understand. I've been trying to learn, but it feels like trying to catch up to a train that's already left the station. I found myself thinking about my sister Jenny, who ran digital marketing for a chain of restaurants across the state. She was always complaining about how hard it was to find people who understood both traditional marketing principles and customer service. Most of the young digital experts she hired knew the technical side but couldn't build relationships with clients. You know, I think you're selling yourself short, I said. The fundamentals of marketing haven't changed. Understanding customers, building relationships, creating messages that resonate. The delivery methods are different, but the core skills are still valuable. That's kind of you to say, but the job market seems to disagree. Maybe you're looking in the wrong places. There are plenty of small businesses that need someone who understands marketing but also knows how to work with people. They can't afford the big digital agencies, but they need someone who can help them figure out how to reach customers. Margaret considered this. I never thought about working with smaller businesses. I always focused on corporate positions because that's what I knew. My sister runs marketing for a restaurant group, and she's always saying the hardest part isn't the technical stuff. It's finding people who can talk to business owners and understand what they really need. Someone with your experience in client relationships would be valuable. Your sister works in marketing? Yeah, Jenny Sullivan Martinez. She handles digital marketing for about 15 restaurants across 3 states, started with 1 location, and grew with the company. She might have some insights about how to transition your skills. Margaret's eyes lit up with interest. Do you think she'd be willing to talk to me? I don't want to impose, but I'd love to get some perspective from someone who's working in the field. I'm sure she would. Jenny loves helping people figure out their career path. Let me give you her contact information. I pulled out my phone and sent Jenny a quick text explaining the situation, then shared her number with Margaret. Almost immediately, my phone buzzed with Jenny's response. Tell her to call me this evening. Always happy to help. She says to call her tonight. Fair warning, though. Jenny talks fast and has strong opinions about everything, but she knows her stuff. Thank you so much. You have no idea how much this means to me. Margaret's voice was thick with emotion. First you figure out how to fix my washing machine, and now you're connecting me with someone who might help with my career. Why are you being so kind to a stranger? I stopped working and looked at her directly. You're not really a stranger anymore, are you? And besides, my dad always taught me that we're all just trying to get through life the best we can. When you can make someone's day a little easier, why wouldn't you? You're so kind, she said softly, and then added almost as an afterthought, and I'm just a 48-year-old widow who can't even fix her own washing machine. The way she said it, like she was diminishing herself, apologizing for taking up space in the world, hit me harder than I expected. I'd heard that tone before, from my mother after my father died, from customers who felt like they were imposing by needing help. It was the sound of someone who'd been beaten down by circumstances and started to believe they didn't deserve kindness. Margaret, I said, setting down my tools and giving her my full attention. You're not just anything. You're someone who built an 18-year marriage, maintained a beautiful home, worked successfully for 8 years at a demanding job, and is now facing a difficult transition with grace and dignity. The fact that you don't know how to repair washing machines doesn't diminish any of that. She looked surprised by my response, as if she hadn't expected anyone to push back against her self-deprecation. I suppose I haven't been thinking about it that way. Well, maybe you should start. The silence stretched between us for a moment after my words. Margaret stared at her hands, then slowly looked up at me with something I hadn't seen in her eyes before. A flicker of hope mixed with uncertainty. You really believe that? She asked quietly. I wouldn't have said it if I didn't. She nodded slowly, as if testing out the idea. It's funny how you can lose sight of who you are when everything changes at once. David's death, losing my job, watching my savings slowly disappear. She trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. But you're right. I've been focusing so much on what I can't do that I forgot about what I can. I turned back to the washing machine motor, giving her space to process while I continued the diagnosis. The shaft could be salvaged with some careful grinding to remove the scoring, and Danny's bearing would fit perfectly. It would take most of the afternoon, but this machine would run for years to come. Tell me about David, I said as I began, reassembling the motor housing. What was he like? Margaret's face softened immediately. He was one of those people who could fix anything. Not just mechanical things, but situations, relationships, problems that seemed impossible. He had this way of looking at things from angles nobody else thought of. She got up from the stool and walked over to a framed photo on a shelf near the laundry area. This was taken the day we closed on this house. He was so excited about all the projects he wanted to tackle. I glanced at the photo, a younger Margaret and a tall man with kind eyes and calloused hands, both grinning widely in front of the yellow house I'd seen this morning. They looked genuinely happy, not the posed happiness of formal portraits, but the real joy of two people embarking on an adventure together. He sounds like he was a good man. The best. He had this philosophy that every problem was just a puzzle waiting to be solved. When I'd get frustrated with work or worry about money, he'd sit me down and we'd break everything into pieces until we found a solution. She touched the photo gently. I miss that perspective. I miss having someone who believed that everything would work out. Maybe that's something you can learn to do for yourself. She considered this. I've been thinking I needed someone else to fill that role, a new job to give me security, maybe eventually someone to share the burden. But you're suggesting I could be my own problem solver. I'm suggesting you already are. You identified the washing machine problem, found a repair service, and scheduled the appointment. You're actively job hunting and trying to learn new skills. You're taking care of a house and managing your finances during a difficult transition. That's all. Problem solving. Margaret returned to her seat, but her posture was different now. Less defeated, more thoughtful. I never thought about it that way. I kept comparing myself to how David would handle things, or how effortlessly other people seem to manage their lives. Everyone's struggling with something. The difference is most people don't talk about it. I secured the motor back into its housing and started reconnecting the belts. Take my business, for instance. From the outside, it probably looks like I have it all figured out. Steady work, loyal customers, expertise in my field. But the truth is, I worry constantly about whether I'm doing enough, whether I should have finished college, whether I'm living up to what my father built. Really? You seem so confident. Confidence and certainty are different things. I'm confident in my ability to fix appliances because I've done it thousands of times. But I'm not certain I'm making the right choices with my life. I looked up from the machine to meet her eyes. The point is, we're all figuring it out as we go. The people who seem to have all the answers are usually just better at hiding their questions. Margaret laughed, the first genuine laugh I'd heard from her. David used to say something similar. He'd tell me that courage wasn't about not being afraid, it was about being terrified and doing the right thing anyway. Smart man. And it sounds like he married a smart woman. I used to think so. Lately, I've felt pretty foolish about most things. I stood up and stretched, my back protesting from being bent over the machine for the past hour. You know what strikes me about everything you've told me? You've been dealing with grief, unemployment, and financial stress, but you've maintained this house beautifully. You're actively working to improve your situation, and you're still kind enough to offer coffee to a repair guy. That doesn't sound foolish to me." Margaret was quiet for a long moment, considering my words. Finally, she spoke. "Can I tell you something? When I opened the door this morning and saw you standing there with your toolbox, my first thought was panic. Another expense I couldn't afford. Another reminder of everything I can't handle on my own. But somehow, talking with you has been the first time in months that I've felt like myself again." Her honesty caught me off guard. I'd come here to fix a washing machine, but something else was happening. Something I hadn't expected when I'd loaded my van this morning. "I'm glad," I said simply. "Sometimes we need an outside perspective to remind us who we are." "Is that what this is? An outside perspective?" There was something in her tone that made me look at her more carefully. She was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Hope, curiosity, maybe something deeper. "I suppose it is," I said, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the moment. We were alone in her basement, surrounded by the comfortable disorder of repair work, sharing stories we probably wouldn't tell to casual acquaintances. Though I have to admit, this isn't how my service calls usually go. How do they usually go? Fix the problem, collect payment, move on to the next appointment. Most customers want efficiency more than conversation. And what do you want? The question surprised me with its directness. I paused, considering how to answer honestly, without overstepping boundaries. "I want to do work that matters," I said finally. "And today it feels like maybe I am." Margaret nodded slowly. "Today feels different for me too." The weight of that admission hung between us. I found myself looking at her differently, not just as a customer or even as a person needing help, but as someone I genuinely wanted to get to know better. The realization was both exciting and terrifying. "I should get back to work," I said, though I was reluctant to break the connection we'd built. "I need to pick up that part from Danny and get this motor properly repaired." "Of course. How long do you think it will take? A few hours for the motor work? Then another hour to reinstall everything and test it. I could have it finished by this evening if you don't mind me coming back." "I don't mind at all. Actually." She hesitated, then continued. "Would you like to stay for dinner? It's the least I can do after everything you're doing to help me." The invitation was simple, but it felt significant. Crossing the line from professional service to personal connection. From fixing her machine to sharing her table. "I'd like that," I said, "but only if you let me bring something. There's a good deli near Danny's shop. I could pick up dessert or wine." "Wine would be lovely. It's been a while since I had a reason to open a bottle." "Then it's settled. I'll be back around 6 with a working washing machine and a bottle of wine." As I gathered my tools, preparing to leave for the parts run, Margaret walked me upstairs. At the front door, she paused. "Jake? Thank you. Not just for fixing the machine, but for," she searched for the right words, "for reminding me that there are still good people in the world. People who care about doing the right thing even when they don't have to." "Thank you for reminding me why I got into this work in the first place," I replied. "Sometimes it takes the right person to help you remember what matters." I walked back to my van, already looking forward to returning. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of Margaret in my rearview mirror, standing in her doorway, watching me leave. For the first time since I'd met her that morning, she was smiling. The afternoon suddenly felt full of possibilities I hadn't anticipated when I'd started my day. Sometimes the most important repairs have nothing to do with broken machines. Danny's shop smelled like machine oil and old coffee, a combination that had become as familiar to me as my own garage. He was bent over a workbench when I walked in, his gray hair catching the light from the fluorescent fixtures overhead. "Jake. Perfect timing. I've got that bearing you need, plus I found something else that might interest you." He straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag that had seen better days. "Motor shaft's in worse shape than you thought, aren't it?" "How'd you know?" "Been doing this for 35 years. When someone calls asking for creative solutions instead of standard replacements, it usually means the damage is more extensive than it first appeared." He walked over to a parts bin and pulled out a small box. "Good news is, I've got a shaft sleeve that should work perfectly. It'll reinforce the damaged area and give you a surface that's as good as new. I examined the part he handed me. It was exactly what I needed. A precision machined sleeve that would slide over the damaged shaft and provide a perfect bearing surface. Danny, you're a miracle worker. What do I owe you for both parts? $60 for everything. But I want to hear about this customer who's got you going to such lengths for a repair that's barely profitable. I paused, unsure how to explain what had happened that morning. She's been through a rough time. Widowed, lost her job, struggling to make ends meet. But it's more than that. She's lost confidence in herself, and I think fixing this machine might help her get some of it back. Danny nodded knowingly. One of those repairs. The kind where you're fixing more than just the machine. Something like that. Well, in that case, make it $50. And take this too. He handed me a small bottle of bearing lubricant. Premium stuff. That motor will run quieter than the day it was made. Danny, you don't have to. Of course I don't have to. But sometimes the best part of this business isn't the money. It's knowing you helped someone when they needed it most. He rang up the sale and handed me the parts bag. Besides, it sounds like this lady could use a little extra luck. As I drove back toward Maple Street, I found myself thinking about Margaret's invitation to dinner. It had been months since I'd shared a meal with someone outside of grabbing lunch with other contractors, or the occasional family gathering. The prospect was both appealing and nerve-wracking. I stopped at Romano's Deli and selected a bottle of Pinot Grigio, hoping it would pair well with whatever she was planning to cook. Margaret answered the door before I could knock, as if she'd been watching for my return. She'd changed into a simple black dress that made her look more relaxed than she had that morning, and the wariness in her eyes had been replaced by genuine warmth. "Perfect timing," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "I just put chicken in the oven. How did things go with the parts?" "Better than expected. Danny found everything I need, plus a few extras that will make this repair even better than I hoped." I handed her the wine. "And I brought reinforcements for dinner. Pinot Grigio, perfect choice. I was hoping you'd pick something light." She led me toward the kitchen, which smelled like roasted herbs and garlic. "I should warn you, I'm a bit out of practice with cooking for more than one person. David used to joke that I could burn water, but I've gotten better since I've had to." The kitchen was cozy and well organized, with copper pots hanging from a rack above a small island. Through the window, I could see a back garden that looked as carefully maintained as the front lawn. "It smells amazing here. What can I do to help?" "Keep me company while I finish the side dishes. Tell me about your friend at the parts shop. He sounds like quite a character." As Margaret moved around the kitchen, preparing what looked like roasted vegetables and some kind of rice pilaf, I told her about Danny and his philosophy of helping people beyond just selling parts. She listened with the kind of attention that made me realize how long it had been since someone had been genuinely interested in the details of my work. "He sounds like the kind of person David would have loved," she said, checking the chicken in the oven. "David believed that the best people were the ones who helped others without expecting anything in return." "Is that why you invited me to dinner? Because of what David would have thought?" She paused, a wooden spoon halfway to her mouth as she tasted the rice. "Honestly, I invited you because for the first time in months I felt like myself when I was talking to someone. And because—" She hesitated, then continued. "Because I was lonely. And you made me remember what it felt like to have a real conversation with someone who saw me as more than just another customer or job applicant." Her honesty was disarming. "I'm glad you asked. This is the first time in longer than I care to admit that I've looked forward to something that wasn't work-related." "Really? You seem like someone who would have a full social life." "You'd think so, but the truth is, most of my friendships faded after I took over my dad's business. My college friends moved on to corporate jobs and marriages and kids, and I got caught up in 12-hour days and weekend service calls. I have work acquaintances and family, but not many people I can just talk to." Margaret nodded in understanding. "It's strange how you can be surrounded by people and still feel isolated. After David died, I realized that most of our social connections had been couple-based. When I became just Margaret instead of Margaret and David, a lot of those relationships became awkward. That must have been incredibly difficult." It was. But talking with you today made me realize I've been hiding from new connections because I was afraid of being hurt again or being a burden on people. She pulled the chicken from the oven, perfectly golden and fragrant. Maybe that was a mistake. We worked together to set the dining room table, falling into an easy rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Margaret had chosen simple white dishes that let the food be the star, and she'd lit candles that cast a warm glow over everything. "Before we eat," she said, pouring wine into 2 glasses, "I want to thank you again. Not just for the washing machine, but for treating me like a person worth talking to. It's been a gift. Thank you for reminding me that there's more to life than just getting through each day efficiently," I replied, raising my glass. "To unexpected conversations and second chances. To fix things that seemed beyond repair," she added, touching her glass to mine. The dinner was excellent. The chicken was tender and perfectly seasoned. The vegetables had just enough crunch, and the rice was fluffy and aromatic. But more than the food, it was the conversation that made the meal memorable. We talked about books, travel dreams that had been put on hold, the small pleasures of daily life that we'd both forgotten to notice. "Can I ask you something?" Margaret said as we were finishing the main course. "When you were talking about your father earlier, you seemed sad about not finishing college. Do you ever think about going back?" "Sometimes. But it feels like such a huge undertaking at this point. I'd be the old guy in classes full of 20-somethings, trying to remember how to study after 15 years of working with my hands. You know, when I was job hunting, I looked into some continuing education programs. There are a lot of options, designed for working adults now. Evening classes, weekend programs, even online degrees that you can complete around your schedule." She refilled our wine glasses. "What were you studying when you left?" "Mechanical engineering. I was actually doing pretty well. I loved the problem-solving aspect and the hands-on labs. It sounds like you've been doing mechanical engineering all along, just in a different setting. Think about everything you know about how machines work, how to diagnose problems, how to find creative solutions when standard approaches don't work. That's engineering. I considered this. I never thought about it that way. I always assumed that because I didn't finish the formal program, I wasn't really qualified to call myself an engineer." "Jake, you spent this afternoon figuring out how to save a motor that most technicians would have written off as unrepairable. You understood the mechanical principles, sourced creative solutions, and developed a repair strategy that will extend the life of that machine by years. If that's not engineering, I don't know what is." Her words hit me with unexpected force. For years, I'd thought of myself as someone who'd fallen short of his potential, someone who'd settled for less than he was capable of. But sitting in Margaret's dining room, seeing my work through her eyes, I began to wonder if I'd been selling myself short. "You know what's funny?" I said. "Here I was trying to help you see your own worth, and you've just done the same thing for me." Margaret smiled, the candlelight making her eyes sparkle. "Maybe that's what good conversations do. They help us see ourselves more clearly." As we cleared the dishes together, I realized that something had shifted during dinner. The connection I'd felt with Margaret that morning had deepened into something that felt significant, like the beginning of something important that neither of us had been looking for, but both of us needed. After dinner, we moved to the living room with our wine glasses. Margaret had turned on a small lamp in the corner, creating pools of warm light that made the space feel intimate and comfortable. Family photos covered the mantelpiece and side tables, telling the story of a life well lived. Margaret and David at various ages, vacation pictures, holiday gatherings with extended family. "Tell me about these," I said, gesturing toward a collection of photos on the coffee table. Margaret settled onto the couch beside me, close enough that I could smell her perfume, something light and floral that suited her perfectly. "That's our trip to Italy 3 years before David died," she said, pointing to a picture of them standing in front of the Colosseum. "We saved for 2 years to afford it. David had always wanted to see Rome, and I wanted to experience the art museums in Florence. You both look so happy." We were. It was one of those perfect trips where everything goes right. Good weather, amazing food, no travel disasters. David spent hours researching the engineering behind Roman architecture, and I got completely lost in the Renaissance paintings. She picked up the photo, tracing David's face with her finger. I haven't traveled anywhere since he died. Partly because of money, but mostly because I couldn't imagine enjoying those experiences without him. Do you think he would want you to stop exploring the world? Margaret was quiet for a long moment. No. He'd probably be frustrated with me for letting fear hold me back. David believed in living fully, even when things were uncertain. He used to say that the worst thing you could do was to stop taking chances just because one risk didn't work out. Sounds like wise advice. It is. I just haven't figured out how to follow it yet. She set the photo down and turned to face me. What about you? Any big dreams you've been putting off? I thought about her question, surprised by how difficult it was to answer. I used to dream about designing things, bridges, buildings, machines that could solve real problems. But somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that those were unrealistic fantasies. What changed your mind about them being fantasies? Life, I guess. Practical concerns. The need to take care of my family's business, pay bills, and be responsible. I swirled the wine in my glass, watching the light play through the liquid. But talking with you tonight, I'm starting to wonder if I gave up too easily. It's never too late to pursue something you're passionate about. Look at me. I'm 48 and trying to reinvent my entire career. That's different. You're adapting your existing skills to new opportunities. I'm talking about going back to school, starting over in a field I left 15 years ago. Margaret leaned back against the couch cushions, studying my face in the lamplight. Can I tell you what I see when I look at you? What's that? I see someone who spent today solving a complex mechanical problem that most people would have given up on. Someone who understood the physics of motor bearings and shaft tolerances well enough to engineer a creative solution. Someone who has the practical experience to know what will actually work in the real world, not just what looks good on paper. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I see an engineer who just happens to work in basements instead of offices. Her words hit me harder than I expected. You really believe that? I believe that education comes in many forms, and experience is often the best teacher. You've been learning engineering principles for 15 years, just not in a classroom. I found myself looking at her with new appreciation. You know, when I walked into your house this morning, I thought I was going to fix your washing machine and leave. I never expected to meet someone who would challenge me to see myself differently. Funny how life works that way. When I called for a repair service, I thought I was just solving a laundry problem. I never expected to meet someone who would remind me that I'm stronger than I think I am. The conversation lulled into comfortable silence. I was acutely aware of Margaret beside me, the warmth of her presence, the way the candlelight caught the highlights in her hair. There was an electricity in the air that had nothing to do with the house's wiring. I should probably get back to work on that washing machine, I said, though I was reluctant to break the spell of the evening. Of course. But Jake? She reached out and touched my arm gently. Thank you for tonight, for dinner, for the conversation, for making me feel like myself again. It's been wonderful. Thank you for inviting me. This has been the best evening I've had in a very long time. We made our way back down to the basement, where the partially disassembled washing machine waited like an unfinished puzzle. Margaret sat on her stool while I laid out the new parts Danny had provided. The motor shaft sleeve fit perfectly, and the bearing slid into place with the satisfying precision of well-machined components. This is fascinating to watch, Margaret said as I carefully aligned the motor assembly. I never realized how complex these machines are inside. Most people don't think about the engineering that goes into everyday appliances. This motor has to generate enough torque to spin a full load of wet clothes, deal with vibration and water, run quietly, and last for years with minimal maintenance. It's actually quite sophisticated. See? That's exactly what I mean about you being an engineer. You understand all the principles behind how this works. As I worked, Margaret told me about her conversation with my sister Jenny, which had taken place while I was at Danny's shop. Jenny had been enthusiastic about Margaret's background and had already sent her information about several local businesses that were looking for marketing help. She's setting up a meeting for me with a client of hers, a woman who owns a chain of boutique fitness studios. They're looking for someone to help with both traditional marketing and developing an online presence. Margaret's excitement was evident in her voice. Jenny thinks my client relationship experience combined with some basic digital training could be exactly what they need. That's fantastic. See? I told you that you were selling yourself short. Jenny also mentioned something interesting. She said her company has been looking for someone who understands both the technical and business sides of things to help with vendor relationships and operational efficiency. Someone who could work with contractors and suppliers to solve problems before they become crises. I looked up from the motor assembly. That sounds like it would be right up your alley. Maybe. But what's really interesting is that she said they specifically need someone who can communicate with technical people, engineers, contractors, repair services. Someone who can translate between the technical world and the business world. There was something in her tone that made me pause my work. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that maybe we both have skills that complement each other in ways we haven't considered yet. Margaret stood up and walked over to where I was working. You understand the technical side of things better than most engineers, but you've never had to think about the business applications. I understand business and client relationships, but I've never had exposure to the technical implementation side. You're suggesting we could work together somehow? I'm suggesting that maybe this isn't just about fixing a washing machine or finding a new job. Maybe this is about two people who each have half of something bigger. I secured the motor back into place and began reconnecting the drive system. Margaret's idea was intriguing, but it also felt like a leap I wasn't sure I was ready to make. What would something like that look like? I asked. I don't know yet. But Jenny mentioned that there's a growing market for small businesses that need both technical problem-solving and business strategy. Companies that are too big for handyman services, but too small for major consulting firms. Margaret sat back down, but her posture was animated now, energized by possibility. What if there was a service that could help them with both sides of that equation? I tested the motor connection and heard the satisfying hum of properly aligned components. It's an interesting idea, but starting a business together when we've known each other for less than 12 hours seems completely crazy? Margaret laughed. You're absolutely right, but sometimes the best opportunities come from unexpected places. As I began the final reassembly of the washing machine, I found myself genuinely considering her suggestion. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that many of my service calls involved problems that went beyond simple repairs. Inefficient systems, poor maintenance practices, equipment choices that didn't match the business needs. You know. What? I said, tightening the final bolt on the access panel. Maybe crazy isn't always bad. Want to see if this thing actually works? Margaret clapped her hands together. I thought you'd never ask. I connected the machine to the water supply and electrical outlet, then loaded it with a small batch of clothes Margaret had waiting. The motor started smoothly. The water filled without leaking, and the agitation cycle began with barely a whisper of sound. It's so quiet, Margaret exclaimed. It sounds better than it did when it was new. Danny's premium lubricant and that shaft sleeve made all the difference. This machine will run for another decade at least. We stood side by side, watching the washing machine complete its cycle with the satisfaction of a job well done. But I knew that what we were really celebrating was bigger than just a successful repair. It was the beginning of something neither of us had anticipated when the day began. 3 weeks later, I found myself sitting in Margaret's kitchen again, but this time the circumstances were completely different. Spread across her dining table were business plans, market research printouts, and legal documents that would have seemed impossible just a month ago. Margaret sat across from me, her laptop open, fingers flying across the keyboard as she refined our client proposal presentation. Okay, so Henderson Manufacturing wants us to evaluate their entire maintenance program and develop a cost reduction strategy that doesn't compromise equipment reliability, she said, looking up from her screen. Based on your initial assessment, what's our timeline looking like? I consulted the detailed notes I'd taken during our site visit the previous day. Their biggest issue is reactive maintenance instead of preventive. They're spending 3 times what they should on emergency repairs because they're not addressing small problems before they become big ones. If we can implement a proper inspection schedule and train their staff on basic troubleshooting, we could cut their annual maintenance costs by at least 40%. And how long will it take to see those results? 6 months for full implementation. But they'll start seeing savings within the first quarter. I leaned back in my chair, still amazed at how naturally we'd fallen into this partnership. Margaret, I have to say it again. I can't believe how quickly this all came together. She smiled, the same warm expression that had convinced me to take a leap of faith 3 weeks ago. Jenny wasn't kidding when she said there was demand for this kind of service. 5 client inquiries in our first 2 weeks of operation. The transformation in both our lives had been remarkable. Margaret had landed the fitness studio marketing contract, which provided her with steady income and renewed confidence. But more importantly, our evening conversation about combining our skills had evolved into something real. We'd spent countless hours over the past weeks developing what we called technical business solutions, a consulting service that bridged the gap between engineering expertise and business strategy. Speaking of Jenny, she called this morning with another referral, Margaret continued. A restaurant group that's having problems with their kitchen equipment efficiency. They're losing money on energy costs and frequent breakdowns. Restaurants are perfect for our service model. Their equipment takes a beating, and downtime costs them money every minute. I made a note in my planner. When do they want to meet? Friday afternoon. But Jake, there's something else we need to discuss. Margaret's tone shifted, becoming more serious. This is happening faster than either of us expected. If we're going to make this a real business, we need to talk about the financial structure and what we both want from this partnership. She was right, of course. What had started as an impulsive idea had quickly gained momentum, but we'd been so caught up in the excitement of new opportunities that we hadn't addressed the practical details of business ownership. I've been thinking about that too, I said. I know I have more technical experience, but you're bringing the business development, skills, and most of the client relationships. This should be a true partnership. I appreciate that, but I also want to be realistic about our respective investments. You're established in this community with 15 years of reputation and client relationships. I'm just getting started. Margaret, without your perspective and business skills, I'd still be fixing washing machines one at a time and never considering the bigger picture. You're not just getting started, you're applying years of marketing and client relationship experience in a new context. We spent the next hour working through financial projections, profit-sharing arrangements, and decision-making structures. It was the kind of conversation that could either strengthen a partnership or destroy it. But somehow Margaret and I managed to navigate it with the same honesty and mutual respect that had characterized our relationship from the beginning. There's one more thing, Margaret said as we finalized our partnership agreement. I know this sounds presumptuous, but I've been thinking about expansion possibilities. What if this regional approach works? What if we could develop a model that other people could replicate in different markets? I looked at her with renewed admiration. You're thinking about franchising? Eventually, maybe. But first I want to prove the concept here. Create systems and processes that consistently deliver value to clients, then document everything so it could be taught to others. She pulled up a file on her laptop. I've been researching the market, and there are thousands of small and medium-sized businesses across the country that have exactly the same problems we're solving here. The scope of her vision was both exciting and intimidating. You realize that would mean transitioning from being hands-on technicians to being business owners and trainers? Yes, and I know that's a big leap. But Jake, we've proven in just 3 weeks that this concept works. We're solving real problems for clients, they're seeing immediate results, and they're willing to pay good money for our services. Why wouldn't we want to share that opportunity with other people? I stood up and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the back garden where Margaret had been working that afternoon. She'd planted new flowers along the border, bright colors, that hadn't been there during my first visit. It struck me that both she and her home were blooming in ways that would have seemed impossible a month ago. You know what convinced me that this partnership could work? I said, turning back to face her. What's that? That first day, when you called yourself just a 48-year-old widow who can't even fix her own washing machine. You were so much more than that, but you couldn't see it. Now look at you. You're developing business strategies, managing client relationships, and planning for expansion. You've become the person you always were but had forgotten how to be. Margaret's eyes grew bright with emotion. And you've become the engineer you always wanted to be, just not in the way you originally imagined. Exactly. And maybe that's better than what we originally planned. We're using our skills to solve real problems for real people. We're building something together that neither of us could have created alone, and we're helping each other become the best versions of ourselves. Margaret closed her laptop and walked over to where I was standing. So, you're saying yes to the expansion idea? I'm saying yes to see where this journey takes us. But I have one condition. What's that? We promise to keep talking to each other. Honestly, even when the business gets complicated or successful or stressful. The reason this works is because we both feel safe being vulnerable with each other. I don't want to lose that. Agreed. And I have a condition too. Name it. We celebrate the small victories along the way. David used to say that success wasn't just about reaching your destination. It was about recognizing and appreciating the good moments during the journey. I smiled, thinking about how much her late husband's wisdom had influenced both of us over the past weeks. Deal. So what's our first celebration? Margaret gestured toward the papers spread across her table. How about the fact that we just created a business partnership that could change both our lives? And we did it while sitting in the same kitchen where we had our first real conversation. Perfect. What did you have in mind? Actually, I was thinking we could recreate our first dinner. Same menu, same wine, but this time we're not strangers sharing a meal. We're business partners planning our future. As Margaret began pulling ingredients from the refrigerator, I realized that what had started as a routine service call had become something neither of us could have anticipated. We weren't just business partners now. We were two people who had found in each other the missing pieces they hadn't even known they were looking for. You know what the best part of all this is? I said, helping her set up for dinner preparation. Tell me. A month ago, we were both stuck. You in grief and unemployment. Me in routine and limited thinking. Now we're building something together that's bigger than either of us imagined possible. And it all started because your washing machine broke. Down, Margaret laughed, the sound filling her kitchen with warmth and possibility. Best broken appliance ever. As we worked together preparing dinner, I couldn't help but think that sometimes the most important repairs happen not to machines, but to hearts and dreams that seemed beyond fixing. Sometimes all it takes is the right person asking the right questions at exactly the right moment. 6 months had passed since that first Tuesday morning, and I was standing in the lobby of the Millbrook Business Center, adjusting my tie and trying to calm my nerves. Today was the day Margaret and I would present our expansion proposal to a group of potential investors, something that would have been unimaginable when I was just a guy who fixed appliances. You look terrified, Margaret said, appearing at my elbow with 2 cups of coffee. She looked polished and professional in a navy blazer, but I could see the excitement dancing in her eyes. I am terrified, I admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. 6 months ago, the biggest presentation I'd ever given was explaining to Mrs. Patterson why her dryer needed a new heating element. Now we're asking people to invest in a business model we invented in your kitchen. Jake, we've done this presentation 12 times in the past month. Chamber of Commerce, 3 different business groups, and 8 individual meetings with potential partners. You know this material better than anyone. She was right. But that didn't stop my hands from shaking slightly as I reviewed our presentation. Notes one final time. What we were proposing was ambitious. A franchise model for technical business solutions that would allow qualified engineers and business professionals to partner together in markets across the region, then eventually nationwide. 5 minutes, folks, called Robert Chen, Margaret's brother-in-law, who had agreed to facilitate today's meeting. When Margaret had first mentioned that David's brother was a successful business attorney with connections to venture capital, I'd been skeptical about mixing family with business. But Robert had proven to be exactly what we needed. Someone who believed in our concept, but wasn't afraid to ask tough questions. Remember, Margaret said quietly, we're not just selling a business model. We're showing them how 2 people can combine complementary skills to create something bigger than either could achieve alone. That's a story that resonates with everyone. The conference room was filled with 12 potential investors and partners, a mix of successful local business owners, retired executives, and 2 representatives from a regional development fund. As we set up our materials, I caught Margaret's eye and saw the same determination that had convinced me to take this leap 6 months ago. Good morning, everyone, Margaret began, her voice steady and confident. 6 months ago, Jake Sullivan was a talented appliance repair technician, and I was an unemployed marketing coordinator. Today, we're here to show you how we built a consulting business that's generated over $200,000 in revenue and helped 15 local businesses reduce their operational costs by an average of 35%. She clicked to our first slide, which showed before and after photos from Henderson Manufacturing. But this isn't just about our success. It's about a replicable model that addresses a massive gap in the market: the need for technical expertise, combined with business strategy for small and medium-sized companies. I took over, explaining the technical side of what we'd accomplished. Most businesses spend enormous amounts on equipment maintenance because they're reactive instead of proactive. They call repair services when things break, hire consultants when problems become crises, and replace expensive equipment when proper maintenance could extend its life indefinitely. One of the investors, Sarah Williams, raised her hand. But there are already maintenance companies and business consultants. What makes your approach different? Traditional maintenance companies focus on fixing problems, not preventing them, I replied. Business consultants understand strategy but not implementation. We bridge that gap by providing both technical expertise and business analysis. Margaret advanced to our case study slides. For example, Henderson Manufacturing was spending $18,000 annually on emergency repairs. We implemented a preventive maintenance program, trained their staff on basic troubleshooting, and redesigned their workflow to reduce equipment stress. Their maintenance costs dropped to $7,000, and their productivity increased by 12%. The key, I continued, is that we don't just fix machines or write reports. We transfer knowledge to the client so they can maintain the improvements long-term. We're not creating dependency, we're building capability. Robert nodded approvingly from the back of the room. We'd practiced this balance dozens of times: technical credibility from me, business strategy from Margaret, and seamless transitions between our expertise areas. Let's talk about scalability, Margaret said, clicking to our expansion model. We've identified over 300 markets across the United States where this model could be successful. Each market needs one technical expert with hands-on experience and one business professional with client relationship skills. An older gentleman in the front row leaned forward. How do you ensure quality control as you expand? What's to prevent franchisees from damaging your brand? Excellent question, Mr. Davidson, Margaret replied. We've developed a certification program that requires 90 days of training and mentorship. Franchisees must demonstrate competency in both technical assessment and client communication before they can operate independently. I pulled up our training curriculum on my laptop. The technical certification covers everything from mechanical systems analysis to electrical troubleshooting to materials science. But equally important is the business side. How to conduct facility assessments, develop implementation timelines, and communicate technical concepts to non-technical decision-makers. We've already tested this model, Margaret added. Jenny Sullivan Martinez and her partner completed our pilot program and launched Technical Business Solutions of the Capital Region 3 months ago. They're on track to exceed our first-year revenue projections by 40%. Sarah Williams looked intrigued. What kind of return are you projecting for investors? Robert stepped forward to handle the financial details. Conservative projections show a 24% annual return over 5 years, assuming we establish franchises in 50 markets. Aggressive growth could reach 40% if we achieve our goal of 120 markets. But here's what excites me most about this opportunity, Margaret said, her passion evident in her voice. This isn't just about generating returns. We're creating a model that helps small businesses become more efficient, saves them money, and creates good jobs for skilled professionals. I nodded, thinking about the clients we'd worked with over the past months. Every business we've helped has been able to reinvest their savings in growth, employee benefits, or community involvement. We're not just building a profitable company, we're strengthening the entire economic ecosystem. The questions continued for another 30 minutes, covering everything from legal structure to technology requirements to competitive analysis. Margaret and I answered them in tandem, our partnership evident in how naturally we supported each other's responses. Finally, Robert called for a brief recess to allow the investors to discuss among themselves. Margaret and I stepped out onto the building's terrace, both needing fresh air after the intensity of the presentation. How do you think it went? I asked, loosening my tie slightly. I think we showed them exactly what they needed to see. That we're not just dreamers with a good idea, but professionals who've proven our concept and built the systems to scale it. I looked out over the town where this all began, seeing it differently than I had 6 months ago. You know what strikes me? When I was driving to your house that first morning, I thought I was going to spend an hour fixing a washing machine and move on with my day. I had no idea I was about to meet someone who would completely change my life. Margaret smiled, the same warmth in her expression that had convinced me to stay for dinner that first night. I was expecting a repair technician to tell me I needed to buy a new machine. Instead, I met someone who helped me remember who I was and discover who I could become. Think we can do that for other people through this franchise model? I think that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to help skilled professionals realize their potential while solving real problems for businesses that need our expertise. Robert appeared in the doorway, his expression giving nothing away. They're ready for you. As we walked back into the conference room, I realized that regardless of what happened in the next few minutes, Margaret and I had already succeeded in the most important way. We'd taken broken pieces of our lives and built something beautiful together. Everything else was just the next chapter of a story that began with a simple act of kindness and grew into something neither of us could have imagined. Before we hear your decision, Margaret said to the room, Jake and I want to thank you for taking the time to consider our proposal. This journey started when a washing machine broke down, and it's led us to opportunities we never dreamed possible. Whatever happens next, we're grateful for the chance to share our vision with you. Sarah Williams stood up, a smile spreading across her face. Well, in that case, we're excited to be part of fixing something much bigger than appliances. 1 year later, I stood in the basement of Margaret's house again, but this time I wasn't alone. 3 new franchise partners were gathered around the same washing machine that had started everything, listening as I explained the diagnostic process that had become the foundation of our training program. The key is understanding that you're not just fixing a machine, I told them. You're solving a problem that affects someone's daily life, their stress level, their confidence in their ability to handle challenges. Every repair is an opportunity to help someone in ways that go far beyond the technical fix. Marcus Thompson, a former mechanical engineer from Detroit, knelt down to examine the motor housing. So, when you first assessed this damage, you were thinking about both the technical solution and the customer's financial situation? Exactly. The standard approach would have been to recommend replacement, but understanding Margaret's circumstances helped me find a creative solution that served her needs better. Linda Vasquez, who'd been a business consultant in Phoenix before joining our program, made notes on her tablet. And that's where the business analysis comes in. We need to understand not just what's broken, but why it broke, what the client can afford, and how the solution fits into their larger operational picture. Margaret appeared at the top of the basement stairs, carrying a tray of coffee for everyone. Over the past year, she'd become the heart of our training operation, helping new franchisees understand how to build client relationships, while I focused on the technical curriculum. How's the lesson going? She asked, setting the tray on the workbench I'd installed for training purposes. They're getting it, I replied, accepting a cup gratefully. Marcus just identified 3 different repair approaches for the same problem, and Linda's already thinking about how to present the options to different types of clients. Our 3rd trainee, Kevin Park, a former business operations manager from Seattle, looked up from the diagnostic checklist he'd been studying. What I find fascinating is how this all started with a simple service call. You two had no idea you were creating a business model that would eventually span 12 states. Margaret laughed, the sound echoing off the basement walls where our story had begun. Trust me, if someone had told me that morning that the repair technician would end up being my business partner and that we'd revolutionize how small businesses approach maintenance planning, I would have thought they were crazy. But that's exactly what happened, Marcus said. I've been researching your client outcomes, and the results are remarkable. Average cost savings of 38%, equipment lifespan extensions of 45%, and a client retention rate of 94%. Those numbers didn't happen by accident, I explained, pulling up our standardized assessment protocol on my laptop. We've systemized every aspect of what Margaret and I learned through trial and error. Initial facility evaluation, client needs, analysis, technical assessment, solution development, implementation planning, and follow-up monitoring. Linda nodded thoughtfully. And the beauty is that the system is flexible enough to work across different industries and company sizes, but structured enough to ensure consistent quality. Over the past year, we'd proven that our model could be replicated successfully. Technical Business Solutions now operated in 37 markets across 12 states, with each franchise partnership averaging $800,000 in annual revenue. More importantly, our franchisees were genuinely helping businesses operate more efficiently while building fulfilling careers for themselves. "Can I ask you something personal?" Kevin said, looking between Margaret and me. "How has the business partnership affected your relationship? It's one thing to have a successful dinner conversation, but quite another to run a company together." Margaret and I exchanged glances, the kind of wordless communication that had developed over months of working closely together. It was a fair question, and one we'd fielded from several prospective franchisees who were considering partnering with spouses or friends. "Honestly," Margaret said, settling onto her familiar stool, "it's been challenging in ways we didn't expect. We've had disagreements about expansion timing, hiring decisions, and resource allocation. But we've also discovered that we balance each other's strengths and weaknesses better than either of us imagined. The key," I added, "is that we established clear communication rules early on. We committed to discussing problems directly instead of letting resentment build, and we agreed that the business decisions would always be separate from personal feelings. Plus," Margaret continued with a smile, "we learned that we both care more about helping people than about being right. When you have that foundation, most conflicts resolve themselves pretty quickly." Marcus finished his examination of the washing machine and stood up, brushing dust off his hands. "This machine is still running perfectly, isn't it?" "Better than new," I confirmed. "That bearing and shaft sleeve I installed are still functioning flawlessly. It's become our proof of concept for the long-term value approach we teach." "Speaking of long-term value," Linda said, consulting her notes, "I've been thinking about the conversation you had with Margaret that first day, Jake. About seeing yourself as an engineer even without the formal degree. Have you ever considered going back to school now that the business is established?" It was a question I'd been wrestling with for months. Our success had given me financial stability and newfound confidence, but it had also raised questions about what I wanted to achieve in the next phase of my life. "Actually," Margaret said, "Jake got accepted to the executive engineering program at State University. Classes start in the fall." The 3 trainees looked surprised, and I felt a familiar mix of excitement and anxiety about the decision. "It's a part-time program designed for working professionals. I'll be able to continue with the business while finally completing my degree." "That's incredible," Kevin said. "How does it feel to be going back after all these years?" "Terrifying and exhilarating at the same time," I admitted. "But I've realized that what Margaret said that first night was true. I've been doing engineering work all along. Now I want to formalize that knowledge and see how it can enhance what we've built." "And what about you, Margaret?" Marcus asked. "Any plans for formal business education to complement your practical experience?" "Funny you should ask," she replied, her eyes sparkling with the same enthusiasm I'd seen when she first proposed our partnership. "I've been accepted to a graduate program in organizational development. I want to study how businesses can create more effective partnerships between technical and administrative functions." Linda smiled. "So, you're both going back to school. Will you be able to maintain the business expansion while you're studying?" "That's where our franchise partners come in," Margaret explained. "We're transitioning from hands-on operators to strategic guides. Our role is becoming more about training, quality assurance, and business development rather than direct client service." "Which brings us to why you 3 are here," I said, gesturing to our trainees. "You're not just learning our methods, you're helping us refine and improve them. Every new franchise partnership teaches us something about how to make the model more effective." Kevin looked thoughtful. "So in a sense, we're all continuing the same process that started with that broken washing machine, taking individual challenges and turning them into opportunities for growth and partnership." "Exactly," Margaret said. "The washing machine breakdown was just the catalyst. The real transformation happened because 2 people were willing to listen to each other, share their vulnerabilities, and imagine something bigger than what they thought was possible." As our training session concluded and the 3 franchisees prepared to return to their home markets, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us to this point. A year ago, I'd been a skilled technician with limited vision for my future. Margaret had been a capable professional who'd lost confidence in her abilities. Together, we discovered that our combined strengths could create something neither of us could have achieved alone. "You know what I'm most proud of?" Margaret asked as we cleaned up the basement workspace. What's that? We didn't just build a successful business. We proved that it's possible to take broken pieces of your life and create something beautiful. And now we're helping other people do the same thing. I looked around the basement where it all began. The same concrete floor, the same washing machine, the same sense of possibility that had emerged from an ordinary Tuesday morning service call. Think we'll still be doing this in 10 years? Doing what? Running technical business solutions? Helping people discover what they're capable of. Finding ways to turn problems into opportunities. Margaret smiled, the expression that had first convinced me to stay for dinner and ultimately changed everything. I think that's who we are now, Jake. Not just business partners, but people who help others see possibilities they didn't know existed. As we turned off the basement lights and headed upstairs, I realized that the washing machine repair had been completed long ago. But the story it started, about partnership, possibility, and the power of kindness between strangers, that story was still being written, and somehow, I knew it always would be. The broken washing machine had taught us the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the most valuable repairs happen not to machines, but to hearts, dreams, and the connections between people brave enough to help each other become who they were meant to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.